This is going to be a video about how I planned and put together my hexagon quilt. This is going to be a quilted wall hanging that measures about 48 by 44 inches. It's made from 936 3/4 inch hexagons, and I used the English paper piecing method to assemble it. This was the first time that I've used this method, and now I'm a huge fan. So I really like color, and my first quilt that I did, I started back in 1999, and this was basically me buying a bunch of fabric that I loved and then combining it in whatever way I thought looked best. So, no fancy pattern or anything, just really enjoying color. I also became really interested in color gradient or color washes, and this was around 2001, 2002, and I happened to be in, I think it was Home Depot, and I saw in the paint section that Ralph Lauren had all of these cool paint samples. They were perfect little squares. The writing on them was really faint. So little by little, I collected them on my visits to Home Depot, and then arranged them, into a color wash, and then used a hole punch and jump rings to connect them. So this ended up being my first color gradient color wash project. So shortly after I finished the paint sample color gradient project, I thought maybe I can do this with fabric. And I really also liked the 9-patch pattern in general. So I thought, well, maybe I'll combine those. So I ended up hand piecing this project. I never got around to hand quilting it. So I think probably because I had a child then, didn't have time. So I ended up turning this into a wall hanging, and it's just kind of gently stretched over a wooden frame. So this was my second experiment with color gradient and color wash. One book that I found really inspirational is Jinny Beyer's Color Confidence for Quilters. This was published back in 1992, and I found it in the late 90s in a bookstore. And when I was looking through it, I saw quilts like this one. I'd never before seen anything like this, a quilt with color wash and really modern style. So I was like, I really want to try this technique. And in this book, I learned about lining up my colors, my fabrics into a color gradient. And that really helped me to make my 9-patch wall hanging. And to this day, I continue to look through it and take inspiration from it. So the second book that I found really helpful was the Quilter's Ultimate Visual Guide, edited by Pahl. It had a section on English paper piecing, and this is where I first found out about English paper piecing and what it was. It's just this 2-page, I think it's just a 2-page section, but it really caught my interest. I really have enjoyed the handwork of my other projects, so I was looking for another hand project. And this showed me everything I needed to know about doing English paper piecing. So extremely helpful. You might want to check it out. Well, like my previous projects, this quilt was going to use a lot of color. And I also wanted to make use of the fabric that I had in my stash. And these 3/4 inch hexagons are perfect for using up small scraps. Now, basically wanted to make a hexagon from each piece of fabric that I owned. Eventually, I also bought charm packs and scrap fabric from eBay and various websites and bricks and mortar stores. So even though I had a lot of fabrics in my collection, I didn't have over 1,000. So what I did was I used some fabrics more than once. For example, this one had some nice purple areas in dark blue and light blue. Was able to pull some oranges and yellows from this one. This one was all over the place with purple, lime green, turquoise, as you can see. And then I had a couple of fabrics like this that had a gradient from dark to light of colors. And I think I had 2 colors like this. And I was probably able to get 3 different blues out of this one, or maybe more. Making these little hexagons is so easy, and it's a really fun part of the project because this is something that you can do when you're watching TV or you're listening to an audiobook or podcast or just chatting with someone. And all you really need is your paper piece. These are 3/4 inch hexagons, and they're measured according to one side, so that's a 3/4 inch side. It's a great way to use your scraps. So you find a scrap, the color you like, and you're going to have like a 1/4 inch seam allowance that goes all around it. You pin it on like that. Now, I am no expert in this, but this is just how I do it. Other people might do it differently, and I'm sure they do. And you trim it off so you've got a 1/4 inch all the way around. Like that. It doesn't have to be a perfect 1/4 inch. Then you are going to need a knotted piece of thread. And this is also a good way to get rid of old thread or thread that you're not going to use, or thick thread, or it's just basting. So the first thing you do is you fold over one edge, then you fold over a second. And then you're going to do a little double stitch here, catching both of those pieces. And you move on to the next edge, folding it over the paper piece. These are made out of cardstock. And you do double stitch. So you definitely get into a rhythm of doing this. It becomes very easy after a while once you get the movement going. There are people who glue-based their English paper pieces. I've never tried that. I don't know if I'm going to try that because I do like the hand sewing part. And also I'm a little wary of using any kind of glue on fabric. I know they make glue specific for this, but I don't know. So then you do I do 3 stitches on the last one to hold it. And there you go. You have got a completed hexagon. So then you multiply this times however many pieces you need. For me, it was over 1,000 of these that I made over time, obviously. And I really enjoyed it. I love hand piecing, hand work. It's very relaxing. So I encourage you to try it. So one side made over 1,000 hexagons. I was a little bit stumped about how to play around with arranging them. I had a 4-year-old and 2 young cats at the time, so I really needed a way to move them around and have them stay where I put them. So I ended up scanning each hexagon so I could see it on a computer screen. And at the same time of scanning, I assigned each a number. And the numbers were attached to each image that was in the computer, and the number was also stuck on the back of each actual hexagon's paper piece. So now all of the hexagons were scanned into the computer and given a number. And then my husband, he wrote a little Java program for me that allowed me to move these pieces around because I didn't have a design wall and I could not lay these things out on a table. There were just too many of them and just too many busy little bodies around my house that might get into them. So starting, it looked like you can see here, these are all my different saves over the years because it took several years for me to get around to making a final decision. So it looks like I started in January of 2012, and this is what it looked like then. And then all of these, I can show you how it morphed over time. You can see that as I click on each save. These are all things that I considered. Eventually ended up taking out the bottom row because there were too many of these dead greens in there. And then I took out a row of the red as well. And going back to this early one right here, I wanted to show you how this program worked. So you could click on a hexagon in the program and move it around, and the other pieces will move around it. And you have to be really careful because you can really mess up your design if you do this willy-nilly. So you can do it like that, or when you hold down Control, you can move a piece all around and it doesn't create havoc wherever it goes. So you can try it out in different places. And looking back at this now in this program, I haven't seen this for a long time, and it reminds me that when I was sewing these hexagons together into rows, I ended up making some more substitutions. Some of these are not in the finished product, like this one in particular did not make it in, neither did this one. Neither did this one, and so I was still searching for fabrics that would work well. So I made decisions as I sewed them along and as I saw that they just didn't work together when I actually had the fabric in front of me. So, but fortunately, with this kind of project, you can make decisions like that as you work. We were able to print out a pattern from this program, and this is what guided me in sewing together all these hexagons. Could not have done it without this pattern. So what I did was I started with the very first hexagon, the top left one, which is number 236. And then I looked for number 905 and I sewed them together at the edge where they touch. Then I would find the next one and sew that to that edge, and so on and so forth, all the way across. And as I did this, I took my yellow highlighter and I marked off the ones that I had done. And that really helped me keep track of everything. Oh, well, what do you think of this? You're the reason I can't have a design board. Yeah. Well, my next step was to organize the actual hexagons by number so that I could find them easily while sewing, because there's so many of them. I then began sewing individual hexes into rows, and then I sewed the rows into groups of about 5 or 6. And finally, I was able to sew the groups together, and that was a great feeling. So once I had sewed all my rows of hexagons together, I was finally at the point where I could flip it over, undo all my basting stitches, you know how I basted all the fabrics onto their little papers, and remove the paper backings, because now all these hexagons were stable because they had been sewed together on all the edges. However, you do not want to remove the papers from the rows of hexagons that make up your edges of your quilt top, because these hexagons on the edges need that paper to maintain their shape while you are working on your quilt border. So then I looked in my stash and I found a bunch of fabric that I had used for my sashiko projects. Really love sashiko stitching. And I will be doing more of that in the future, but I had plenty of this left over, so I created a border that I thought would frame the quilt really well. And I know that a lot of people, or maybe not a lot of people, but I know people do trim off the points and these little bumpy edges of the quilt, of the hexagon quilts, so you can have a straight border with the border. But I really didn't want to do that. I just love the shapes of the hexagon, and I thought it would look really cool against that border fabric. So I then went and appliqued the quilt onto the border. I think it turned out really nicely. It's just kind of floating. It looks like it's kind of just floating on top. So that's how I made the border. I'm still not quite sure what the finished width of it will be. I don't know. I'm going to see once I get my quilting done. I'm going to see how wide I want the border to be. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And stay tuned for future sewing related videos. Right, Mavis? Bye.